It was the winter of 1914. Millions of men lay in the mud of Europe, fighting a war that was supposed to be over by Christmas. It wasn't. But on one cold night along a frozen stretch of the Western Front, something happened that no general ordered, no politician approved, and no one could quite believe, even as it was happening. For a few hours the guns went silent, enemies became men again, and two armies that had been trying to kill each other for months laid down their rifles to sing. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand what came before it. World War I had started only 5 months earlier, in the summer of 1914. Soldiers on both sides had been told the same thing. This would be quick. A few battles, a swift victory, home by Christmas. Instead, by December, the war had turned into something no one expected, a stalemate. Armies dug into trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles, sometimes just 50 to 100 yards apart. Close enough to hear each other talk, close enough to smell each other's cooking fires, the British, French, and Belgian troops on one side, the Germans on the other. Between them, a strip of shattered earth soldiers called no man's land, freezing, muddy, littered with debris, and deadly to cross. By December 24th, both sides were exhausted, cold, wet, and far from home. Then, as night fell, something strange began. Along parts of the German line, soldiers started placing small candles and lanterns on the parapets of their trenches, the edges facing the enemy. Then came the sound. Not gunfire, singing, German voices drifting across no man's land, carrying the notes of Stille Nacht, silent night. On the other side, British soldiers froze. Some assumed it was a trick, others simply listened. One British soldier later wrote in a letter home that he recognized the tune immediately. Even though the words were foreign, it was a carol he'd sung in church as a child. When the Germans finished, there was a pause. Then, hesitantly, British voices answered back, singing the first Noel in English. Verse for verse, carol for carol, the two enemy armies began singing to each other across the dark, quiet field between them. Then came shouted words, not orders, not threats, simple greetings. "Merry Christmas, Tommy," one German soldier called out, using the nickname British troops were known by. "Merry Christmas, Fritz," came the reply. Some officers were alarmed. Fraternizing with the enemy was strictly forbidden, punishable in theory by court-martial. But out here, hundreds of miles from headquarters, in the freezing dark, the rules suddenly felt very far away. When the sun rose on Christmas morning 1914, something even stranger happened. In several places along the front, soldiers began climbing out of their trenches, unarmed, hands visible, walking slowly into the open ground that only a day earlier meant almost certain death to cross. No one had ordered this. No treaty had been signed. It simply began. One man, then another, then dozens, stepping into no man's land to meet the enemy face to face. What followed was almost unimaginable. Men who had been trying to kill each other 24 hours earlier shook hands. They exchanged small gifts, cigarettes, buttons from their uniforms, tins of food, chocolate, whatever they had. Some traded addresses, promising to write after the war. Officers on both sides, seeing it was already happening, allowed it to continue rather than risk mutiny by trying to stop it. In some sections, soldiers even helped each other bury the dead who had been lying in no man's land for weeks. Men who couldn't be recovered while the fighting raged, now finally given a proper burial, side by side, British and German chaplains reading services together. And then, in at least one place along the line near the Belgian town of Ypres, someone produced a football. Accounts differ on exactly how organized it was. Some describe a full match, others a loose kickabout in the mud with helmets as goalposts. But the image has become the most famous symbol of that day. British and German soldiers, enemies in every official sense, playing football together in no man's land. According to some accounts, the Germans won. It didn't matter. For those few hours there was no war, just men, a ball, and a frozen field. The truce wasn't everywhere. Some sections of the front saw no pause in fighting at all. In places, men were killed on Christmas Day itself. But historians estimate the truce touched roughly 2/3 of the British-held line, involving perhaps 100,000 men in total. It happened independently, in dozens of separate locations, without coordination between them. Different regiments, different armies, arriving at the same impossible idea at almost the same time. Just for today, let's not fight. When word of the truce reached commanding officers further from the front, the reaction was not celebration. It was alarm. Generals on both sides worried that soldiers who saw their enemy as fellow human beings would be less willing to kill them. Strict orders were issued. Any future fraternization would be treated as a serious offense. Artillery bombardments were scheduled deliberately for the following Christmas, specifically to prevent it from happening again. It never occurred on the same scale again for the rest of the war. By December 26th in most places, the truce quietly ended. Soldiers shook hands one final time, exchanged last words, and returned to their own trenches. Within days, in some places within hours, the shooting resumed. Men who had shared cigarettes and sung carols together were once again under orders to kill each other. The war would continue for nearly 4 more brutal years. Millions more would die, including, almost certainly, some of the very men who had stood in that field on Christmas Day. So why does this story still matter more than 100 years later? Because it's proof of something armies and governments often try to make people forget in wartime, that the soldier on the other side is still just a person, cold, scared, homesick, and human. For one day, in the middle of one of history's deadliest wars, ordinary men on both sides decided that briefly, quietly, without permission from anyone above them, they would choose peace. It didn't stop the war. It didn't change its outcome. But it happened. And in a conflict remembered mostly for its horror, the Christmas Truce of 1914 remains one of the only moments remembered for its humanity.